Welcome to episode 2 of our talk with Darren Southam from the East of England Ambulance Service, where last discussions were all about the causes of stress in the workplace. And when we left him in our last session, we were talking about triggers, and Phil was explaining about an officer that he had dealt with recently as well. So we're just going to introduce myself again. I'm Stephen Belf, and I'm a resilience coach and therapist at, Fountain Therapy. And I'll introduce Chris.
Hi there, I'm Chris Puddy. I am a personal trainer, but I have a passion for all things mental health and how the body fits in with the mind to make sure we've got balance. I work within the Fountain Therapy group. I'll pass you over to Monica.
Hello, I'm Monica Barro. I'm an integrative hypnotherapist, psychotherapist, and lucid dreaming facilitator in Fountain Therapy.
Hi, I'm Phil Wayne, also with Fountain Therapy. I'm an integrative psychotherapist and all sorts of other type of therapy.
All sorts of magical stuff that he can do.
It could be magic.
And then we've got Darren Southam, who hasn't run away after the last session, so he'll introduce himself again.
Hi, I'm Darren. I'm a senior paramedic and second in charge team leader for the East of England Ambulance Service Hazardous Area Response Team.
Fantastic. So at the end of the last session, we'd mentioned TRIMS and the trauma risk incident management we was doing, and obviously we talked about some triggers, and then Phil spoke about an officer that had come and seen you the last few days. So I don't know if we want to touch back on yours, Phil, and then go back to Darren.
Just briefly, I was just saying that this particular, we were talking about how that people learn to manage their behaviour amongst their colleagues. I had noticed this particular officer just on his beat out on the street, and so I was just driving past in the car, so he didn't know I'd seen him. But on 2 occasions I'd seen him, and I just came in and said to the sergeant, there's not something right here. And I think it's those moments, unguarded moments, and I think he felt he wasn't able to, because he hadn't actually initiated anything, and so it was then the sergeant that initiated an encounter with him to try and discuss what they should do.
I'm quite intrigued by that, because you were just passing and you've just noticed something not right about the officer. Can you put your hand on or head
I
what
think,
it was?
I suppose I don't know whether it is magic, but you seem to. I can tell by the way people they're holding their shoulders, the way they're walking, the glaze in their eyes. You know, I went to an interview once and I said, "Oh, do you realise that person down there suffering from depression?" And they went, "How do you know?" I said, "Well, just look at the way he walks." So whether it's my 5 years at university and my 1,000 hours of therapy that I've done that gives me some experience that helps me identify some of these things, probably does. But in this case, this guy just looked, he was walking aimlessly. There was no, whereas often officers will be talking or engaging with someone, and he clearly wasn't.
I think that's a very key point, because often it's the people that you're around day in, day out, the people that you're crewed up with, the people that you live with, the people that you associate with, that will pick up on the slight behaviour changes more necessary than anything that's verbal, any verbal cues. Yeah. I know from my own perspective, I had an incident when I was reaching that point of burnout before, and a colleague had said to me, your shoulders have dropped, you're hunched and you're looking at the floor. Now I just, in my mind, I was powering through the office, but it was the way in which I was doing it. Shoulders have dropped. Yeah. And it's that moment of understanding when someone's starting to become a little bit withdrawn, when they're not talking about much else but work, when they realise it's the sort of the stages of burnout. So we look at all the different stages of burnout, and it's the bodily postures play such a big part. And then also, when we look at those stages of burnout, often one of the indicators is people getting niggles, colds, slight ailments, and that's where we see it. And it's the people around you that notice it more often than not, rather than any person necessarily putting their hand up and saying, "I need some help."
I think it's the non-verbal signs as well that people that are close to can see, and it's snapping at things that they wouldn't normally snap at. It's not getting involved in the joke that they normally would. They're all triggers that I think are becoming more aware. And as I said in the previous cast, East of England have got documentation that can help people identify those. But just being a mate with someone, just spending, we spend 12 hours on a shift with people, you will notice a change in demeanour. As you say, the shoulders drop, the introvertness. And it's having the confidence, which I don't think a lot of people, certainly the newer members of staff have. Again, us old dinosaurs, I've got the confidence that I can go up and say, "Is everything all right? Come and have a chat. Just step away, we'll go outside, No one needs to know. We can go and talk, as far as they're concerned, we can be talking about anything. Just go and have a chat. And it's making that first contact and letting people know that actually people do care, people do notice, and that sometimes just talking is the first step to getting help.
So is that responsibility on you? Are you a manager of sorts as well?
So very differently to the police service, we have a similar ranking structure, but we have what's called a team leader, which would be the equivalent to a sergeant. Within the Heart team, we have what's called a 2IC, a second in charge. So I'm of that sort of, sergeant-esque level.
Right. So it would be your responsibility to notice that as well.
I think it's everybody's responsibility, but predominantly, yes, as a team leader management role.
What sort of training are you aware of that sort of gives everyone that responsibility to look out for each other?
Again, that's an incredibly good question. Up until fairly recently, very little.
Right.
Other than life experience. There is now a management training programme.
Right.
But there are so many people that need to go on it. There's obviously a delay in getting people through.
Right.
I think a lot of it is done on people's experience, having been in the job for a while, having done other things, and just being mature enough to notice that and take the steps.
Right. Monica, did you ask a question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, because you say, as the dinosaurs and so on in a job, because more and more you do something and you're exposed more and more to this kind of really traumatic events. But in a way, you start to desensitize that emotional attachment to that, isn't it? You become more. It's not that you're becoming more insensitive, but it's like you desensitize that emotional attachment, and so you can actually be more practical and manage better.
I think that
sums it up perfectly.
That's a coping strategy.
Yeah.
And more often than not, people can appear cold when it is actually the complete opposite. And it's our responsibility, and I would include myself in this, everyone in the room, it's our responsibility to look at how people around us are behaving. And we don't take at face value what they're saying. We have to look beyond that point and consider their non-verbal communications, the cues, what's going on in their life. And that's where, yes, it would be great to say across all of the emergency service, across all of the military, across all of the public sector, everywhere, that we would roll out training to say to people, right, this is how you look for people's cues. This is how you look for people's, the way they hold themselves, the things they say. But it goes back to that point you mentioned earlier, where we've got new people coming into these career paths that have no life experience. Yes, on paper you can have qualifications. Yes, you may have a degree. Yes, you may have passed X, Y, and Z exam. But what you don't have is life experience. And that life experience and that resilience, the only way you can get that is it's earned through experience. And you have to have that experience. You have to have seen what it's like with a client, your colleague, when they're doing well versus when they're having a tough day. Because it's that point that you're going to notice it. We band around these hashtags, it's okay not to be okay. And it's done in some respects because it's the thing to do at the moment. But the reality is, it's okay not to be okay. But we need to create that culture of embracing everybody around us and opening up to people and asking them, probing them, not taking that first answer, going that little bit further and checking, really, let's go for coffee.
Sometimes just that arm around the shoulder.
Yeah.
Certainly after a traumatic job, or as I say, even some of those benign jobs that don't necessarily you expect to be ones that affect you. It is just sometimes that arm around the shoulder and good job. Yeah. Some of the best words I think in my service, certainly, because as I alluded to last time, most of my issues, and I think a lot of my colleagues, it's whether you've done the job well. And as long as you can get told, yeah, you've done a good job, that's a big part of being able to deal with it and cope with it. But also, if you haven't done a good job, structuring that in a constructive way rather than just beating with a stick. Okay, things didn't go quite to plan, but this bit did go well, but actually maybe next time we can look at doing this. It's about educating as well. And I think on top of all of the other things, that's quite a core thing, is to make sure people understand we are only human. You're not going to get everything 100% right all of the time, as much as we'd like to aspire to do so, but picking the positives into people to give them that boost to say, I've done as good as I could have done at that point.
But Chris, you alluded to it earlier when you said that when you walked through that office and your shoulders had slumped, because it was your norm and you were trying to cope, you weren't noticing your changed posture.
But that's something you cannot, and I say that you cannot hide. as hard
Yeah.
as you try, you can
Yeah.
hide your words, you can hide the
Yeah.
things you're saying, but there's those non-verbal cues. There's the things that you do that are slightly out of kilter,
Yeah.
that the people that know you will pick up on.
Yeah.
You know, I had plenty of time with Darren to know little elements about him. You know, I had the benefit of being able to go to jobs with him. You know, so I saw parts about how he worked. Parts with Steve, I knew how he worked. So we would bounce off each other. He was tough, man. He was a ball breaker. He really was. He wasn't really. But no, you pick up on these things, don't you?
Absolutely.
You just got to... That's my concern when we talk about people coming in that young. I've got no issue about people coming in that's young. No issue with that at all. But it's how you get them from this point to rapidly accelerate to the point in which they recognise those people around them, what's going on with them.
And as I said before, I don't want to tar all of them with the same brush. There are some that are very good straight away, clinically, professionally. My concern, and again, some are better than others, it is about developing them emotionally, maturity within the job in a structured manner without pushing them too fast.
It's a big call, yeah.
It's holding their hand, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is holding their hand.
When I joined, you had a minimum of a year with an experienced member of staff. An experienced member of staff then was somebody that had been in the job sort of 10 years. So they'd seen it, done it, been there. I don't think a lot of the guys now have that advantage. And I'm only, I think, the clinician that I am and the team leader manager that I am now because of that installation I had. And I was very lucky to have that.
Some of the effects, obviously, I did speak to you before we come on air earlier, and obviously there has been effects of some of these jobs that have got to the point where there was 3 in the east of England, 11 days to commit suicide. And whilst I know you can't speak about that, and there was one in the LAS as well, the London Ambulance Service. Do you think that's volume of work again, or do you think this is, again, there was mentioned the word bullying in the report and all sorts of things, so that sounds to me that maybe they're not getting some support.
So I've seen similar reports. I can only speak from personal experience, and I haven't experienced bullying. It is something that the East of England Ambulance Service do not tolerate at all. We have a bullying and harassment policy. It is strictly adhered to. If it's reported, it is investigated and it is dealt with. In my experience, I'm sure there's people that work in my service that will disagree with me, but I can only speak from a personal side of that. The 3 cases that have been reported, I don't know an awful lot about. What I do know from speaking to people is that I think stress, as in workloads, plays a big part at the moment. And there are trials that go on in various areas to try and reduce late finishes, which is, I think, probably most staff members would say is their biggest cause of stress, because that affects not just your work but your home life as well. You know, a 12-hour shift is a long enough shift as it is. Quite often we only get a half an hour break within that 12 hours. You might get that 10 hours into your shift if it's busy. To then be 2 hours late off, you miss putting your kids to bed at night, you miss seeing your wife, your girlfriend, your partner. It has a massive knock-on effect, and then you have to come back the next day and do the shift all over again.
Exactly, yep.
And I think over and above the physical incidents that we turn out to, the workload with the reduced number of staff, so you're doing more jobs with the pressure to turn around quickly and the late finishes, I think has a massive impact on people. And the service are trying. There is no easy fix, and it's not just East of England. I think it's every ambulance service and probably every emergency service across the country that have the same issue. And if there was an easy solution, they would have done it by now. But I think work needs to continue to be done on that.
Yeah.
With that, there is an element, unfortunately, and I don't mean to sound harsh in any way, but these careers have a warning label. You know, when you go into these types of careers, there effectively is a warning label. You're going into that environment, and I think there is an element that you know that you're going into that environment, but it's what can be done, and it's got to be a whole culture shift, because 12 hours, I understand, I mean, it's been trialled in numerous places, but you've 12 hours and you have that extra hour, extra 2 hours, before you know it, that period of rest between is non-existent. So you're going from work thinking about work, going to work thinking about work, non-stop all day, and that's the triggers toward burnout.
So we have to have 11 hours off between shifts. So if you are 2 or 3 hours late off, you can come in 2 hours late for the next shift. Now, that's great. For me personally, that doesn't necessarily work, because I work in just outside of Cambridge. I live in Hemel Hempstead. So if I was to be 2 hours late off, I would still have to leave home to get to work at the same time because of traffic. Otherwise, I'd be 4 hours. Now, that's my personal choice. I work there. I knew that was the travelling distance. You're right. When I joined the job, it's a 12-hour shift. It's 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And I think most people do appreciate that. The problem arises is when that's now pretty much every other shift.
Yeah.
As opposed to when I first started, it was once in a while. You kind of just accepted that was the unfortunate case. It does now appear to be a much more regular occurrence. And as I say, the service are trying, and they have tried various things in different areas. The problem is a solution for West Herts isn't necessarily going to work in Norfolk. And as the East of England Ambulance Service was so big, it's trying to find the right solution for the right area, for the right people.
I just want to get Monica, having listened to this from an outsider sort of point of view, who hasn't worked in emergency services, do you get many people coming to you with a similar type stress?
I do, and especially from the corporate world.
Right.
So I had quite a few clients actually from the corporate world, and actually quite high position in the company, and they feel the pressure, and they always have to pretend that they're okay, and sometimes they feel like numbers with no identity. And the amount of them they are turning to drugs, alcohol, gambling, and so on, because there's nowhere to turn. And especially men. I saw more men than women with this kind of issue, because for them it's more difficult to say, I'm not okay.
Yep.
They have to be okay everywhere, so they keep wearing that mask.
Yep.
I'm okay.
And Phil, you've been around for a long time in the service, and you've seen a decline or an improvement. What's your thoughts?
No, well, I agree with Monica in some sense. I'm meeting people also from in the corporate world, and the feedback I'm getting is that they're actually the new people coming in, rather than developing and finding a balance, they're just playing hard, like they're working hard. And so you work hard and then you go and play hard. So every weekend they're on a plane, they're on a train, they're off, and then they come back, and so they're never calming down. And so you're getting people who are then getting stressed all round. And I think the rate that society runs at, the pace of everything is just so fast. I was even talking to someone in Rickman's High Street today, and they said their 6-year-old wants to take their iPad, and she said the child's not even old enough to know what an iPad is, and so everything is so much pressure, and we're bombarded with what we have to do, and so people just trying to stand up are dealing with pressure. Forget the emergency service. This is probably replicated in most corporate organisations because, and I would think there's probably not as much protection as we're hearing that there is in the forces, because the forces recognise it. Many of the corporate people don't.
I would say it's in schools as well, the pressure.
That's the problem, though. Even to stay still, you're moving backwards.
Absolutely.
And that's, if you look at the ambulance service, from an outsider's perspective, people working 12 hours on and having effectively, 12 hours off effectively, isn't it?
Meant to be.
Yeah, meant to be 12 hours on, 12 hours off. The compound effect of that lack of downtime, that lack of rest period, means that you're in that. We talk about the old. Is it the amygdala, the fight, flight, freeze?
Yeah.
You're in that moment of fight all the time because you're hyper aroused, you're on edge. Now, and it worries me, and I know, yes, I said about there's these warning labels when you join these jobs. But I wonder how many people, when they join these jobs, actually thought, well, okay, I'm going to do, let's say, 4 days work. I'm sure they didn't think I would be working effectively 4 times 24 hours, because you're never quite switching off, because you never quite get that time to down-regulate, to ease off, from if I'm just looking at your perspective, 12 hours, let's say it takes you hour and a half, best part of 2 hours to get to work. So that 12 hours has become 16 hours. That only leaves you with 8 hours, and in that 8 hours you've got to get some rest, you've got to get some food, you've got to get changed. Where's the time? Where do you get that? Where's that cut-off point? How do you switch off?
I think I've just got used to it to a degree. I try and make the most of my rest days. So I know our shift pattern's slightly different from when you're in the police, and it's one of the reasons why I prefer to do the 12-hour shifts, because you do effectively a 4 on, 4 off. Now, although your first rest day is off of a night shift, so it's part of it. But I will then try and utilise those 3 rest days very well. I try to forget that work is work. Once I leave at the end of that shift, that's me done. Most of the time. I then try and enjoy my children, my wife. She's a nurse, so she has similar experiences and issues. And I think part of my coping mechanism as well as hers is that we have similarities in our jobs so that we can bounce off each other there. Although we're very conscious of trying not to talk about it at home very often. Otherwise, that's all you talk about. And that goes into what you're saying. You then don't get the downtime. Obviously, I know your wife, you would have had a similar issue when you were both in the job. And I think you probably did the same. You try and separate that, not to discuss it at home. And I think, again, without slamming the younger generation as they're coming into the job, I don't know whether or not they're able to do that, whether they have that cut-off or whether that's something that plays on their minds. Certainly when I joined at 23, I joined late back then, we used to go out, police and ambulance, we had that sort of family atmosphere. That was our release. We'd go out, enjoy evenings or days out or whatever. So you're still with peers, but you didn't talk about work. You just enjoyed each other's company and made the most of the fact that you weren't at work. And that's how I deal with it.
Well, I think time's got better for us again. I think, firstly, I want to thank Darren for coming in to see us and talk to us. I think openly, I think we need to get somebody from the younger generation and speak to them, just to find out what their view is as well, to see how they feel, if they're under pressure at some point. Because to say, we don't really know how they're thinking, do we? But I want to thank you. Did you want to say something as well, Chris?
Well, I think I just wanted to, for anyone that's listening, just to reinforce that message that we really have to take care of those around us. Because if we can hope to make any sort of improvements, any sort of changes, we really need to drill down and help each other. And it's, you are the sum of all the parts around you. And it's those people around you that are going to prop you up and help you. And no doubt, had you not had a supportive wife, children, and a loving home, everything that's going on would be so much more difficult. You're factoring those 16 hours. But I think it's just really important to say, reach out. If we can help in any way, please reach out and we'll do our best.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything, Monica?
No, it's
or
just
Phil?
thank you very much for coming and sharing.
Thank you
And
for having me.
it's a completely new world to
Yeah.
me, the police and the ambulance services, but it's just an eye-opener that everybody needs help and everybody needs to talk to somebody and just watch out for the body language, the people who are around you and work in these very stressful jobs.
Again, on behalf of all of us, I obviously want to thank Darren for his service as well to emergency services, bearing in mind that me and Chris have done a runner. But well done to Darren. So thank you very much. Again, if you have heard anything you like today and want to get in touch, and obviously contact us, Fountain Therapy. But if you want any mental health advice, which is immediate, then obviously ring 999 or call the Samaritans, or at least just speak to a colleague as urgently as you can. Thank you.